Takt planning applies to any type of project. There's a misconception in the industry that it's only good for multifamily or repetitive projects, and that's just not true. We do Takt planning with amazing results on airports, laboratories, schools, high-end architectural, civil, like anything. And that will become clear in the process that I'm about to talk about. So the first thing, we research the drawings and at a high level understand how everything flows. And we actually identify functional areas first. There's so many mega projects out there, you can't run one, like $1.55 billion project is one project. You have to break it up. So functional areas are breaking those big projects up. Then second, making sure that we understand the phases, which is pretty simple. And then getting a preliminary zone count for each of the phases. And that comes from the builders. So that's all good. Up to this point, normal stuff. We are nowadays describing every one of those phases and zones and putting them into AI and having AI analyze the ideal flow. Just one quick example on that. I remember in Scottsdale, there was a core and shell building with really high-end exterior finishes. And the superintendent and company that we took over for, meaning they were removed, we were brought on, when I was working for a general contractor, they just said north, east, southwest for the exterior. But when you break up production areas, you actually find it's northeast, southeast side, southwest side, west, north central, east, southeast, southwest, and then northwest on the exit. And people are like, wait a minute, why would I sequence the exterior like that? But you find out, and Holly, you're nodding your head, I'm sure you've done this so many times, that we needed to sequence it like that to take care of the exit and the hoist. The southeast wasn't ready for the eaves, and the southwest needed time for the exterior scrim and shade structure to be put in place before we could do our work. So the sequence that we analyzed was actually perfect, and the exterior contractors loved it, and we shaved 3 months off of the schedule. So that's one of the first things that we do, is analyze phases and zones. Then when we get down to the phases, and the superintendents and PM tell us, hey, what is the number of zones that you think this will want? What does the building want this to be? They'll be like, okay, I think we're going to break this up into 6 zones. Well, we put it into the calculator, and our calculator says, well, what if it was 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, all of these different permutations of zones and configurations, and it tells us what the duration will adjust to. And I want to remind everybody that any option has the same duration for the trade, meaning their individual activities never get shortened, but because of how we break it down, the actual throughput time for the phase shortens. And then somebody would say, yeah, Jason, but phases it's not always the same. It's like different areas. Now, this is where it gets genius. We don't break up zones by area. We break it up by work density. And so, let's say that you have a school, and the entry lobby is open and kind of simple, and then you go into some classrooms, right? And then it's more complex. And then you get into some experimental lab spaces, for your science department in the school. And then you go to the gymnasium, right? And people are like, well, that's not rhythmic, Jason. We can't go through there. Well, we Takt processes. The flooring type might be different in every room, but every room has flooring. The wall types might be different in every room, but every room has walls. You get my point. Flooring, walls, MEP, finishes. And we're running the train of trades, the sequence through these areas, through these zones. You might go to a zone that's 4,000 square feet, and the next one might be 14,000 square feet. Why? Because in the 4,000 square foot zone, work is very dense. And in the 14,000 square foot zone, it's fairly open. There's not much in there. But when trades go from zone to zone to zone, they experience a similar amount of work. And so when we run it through the calculator and right size the zones, the Takt time and the zone size become clear. And we don't tell the builders what to do. We give them a list. We're like, okay, at six zones, you have this. At 8 zones, you have this. At 11 zones, you have this. And then the super and the PM were like, oh, wow, 11 zones, that's 8,000 square feet. Okay, that's plenty of room. Oh, my gosh, we just saved 30 days. Oh, wow, that's super cool. I see how these zones are configured and how we can flow right through the building. All right, that is our Takt time. That is our zone size. And then that allows us to put together the overall production plan. And just a quick plug, in our software in Takt, once that's done, we can export to any CPM schedule. In fact, we just recently did it, and the schedule health score was 70%. And then with a couple of connected logic ties, the schedule health score went up to 98% for the 14-point DCMA checklist. It's beautiful. The only other thing that I would say is that when the contractor is early on in the project, we actually know a mathematical way to identify what the contractual promise should be, right? So the concept is promise something that's reasonable and then target something that's faster, right? So I'm going to promise the owner this milestone that's reasonable, but with the trades, we're going to attempt to do a little bit better, right? There's this concept, and I don't need anybody to understand it mathematically, but it's called realized flow potential. So when we plug in the zone count for the different options, it also calculates a realized flow potential. And all that means is from 0 to 100, 0 being the slowest, 100 being the fastest, where are you on that? I'll just give you a quick example. If you go do a phase for the interiors and you say, hey, I want to break this up into 5 zones, that it typically ends up being between 30 and 50% realized flow potential. And then if you're like, oh no, but now with the trades after the pull plan, I want to do it in 11 zones, that's typically between 50 and 100. And what we've found historically is that 30 to 50% realized flow potential is the perfect percentage for your contractual promise. It's competitive. You can win proposals that way. The owner feels like it's fair. It is fair per historical records and is reasonable. And then when you go between 50 and 100 realized flow potential, that's faster. That's where you have smaller zones. You have like 6, 8, 10, 12,000 square foot zones, and your takt time is 5, 4, or 3, right? And you're going so well, and the trades still have the same amount of time. And you have like 10, 20, 30 days of buffer in each of these phases because of what you did. And so in that scenario, I promised this, but after the pull plan, I've narrowed it to this, gives us those buffers. So instead of heading into a schedule, hitting a delay, and oh crap, we're already behind, we start with the schedule and we hit a delay. Oh, I can eat into a buffer. I can use another buffer. And still you can hit impact after impact after impact and still hit the milestone, and this is the most important thing, without ever hurting people. And so that's how we work with our clients to do that. And then they have a beautiful one page for their contractual promise, and then they have the software and intact for their production plan, and it automatically filters out the look aheads, weekly work plans, day plan for the trade partners to make adjustments and commitments.
So listening to you explain how it works takes me back to my days as a project scheduler, where I would have regular and routine conversations. I'll call them conversations with my superintendents or my owners or my clients about, I maybe didn't call them zones, phases, areas.
Yeah.
Breaking the work up, just like you described for that exterior, breaking the work up into pieces because it makes it more manageable and it's easier to schedule and people understand where they're going next instead of just calling it the east wall, right?
Yes.
I always ran across the why do you want to put that much level of detail into that? We don't need to see 50 tasks for that east wall, Holly. That mindset of I don't need to know all of those pieces in order to get the project built. How have you addressed that by showing and it's by doing? How do you convince, because I know that mindset is still very prevalent out there in construction with owners, with construction companies. Why do I want to put all this work into it up front, to put all this detail up front when I know that the plan and projects continuously change and grow and you get change orders, you get extra work?
And so I think there's 2 parts to that, if you'll allow me to break those up. One is the amount of detail early on, and I'm probably somewhere in the middle on that, in the sense that, like, I remember a big hospital project where before there was even any design, which is not what you're suggesting, so this is completely separate, but the superintendent built literally like a 58-page, by the time it was printed on 11 by 17, I don't know how many activities, but I knew it was 58 pages, complete CPM schedule for a project that hadn't even gone through conceptual design or concept design. And you and I wouldn't agree with that. You don't even have design, right? And then there are people in the industry that say, oh, let's not do really any or too much planning until 3 weeks out. And that's dangerous, because you and I know that we have to queue up the supply chains. And one of the things that I love to say is that having a last planner system automatically presupposes that you have a first planner system. You can't have a last planner system unless there's a first planner system. So I'm preaching to the choir with you, but for the sake of the podcast, how many times have we seen trade partners sitting in a conference room trying to implement last planner, and the superintendent says, well, you've committed to this date. What about the next activity? Or can you make a commitment? Can you promise that trade? What is our weekly work plan? And the trade's like, I can't commit to anything. I don't have the materials. And you're like, well, why don't you have the materials? Well, talk to my shop. Like that, we don't have the materials. But I need you to commit. Well, I can't commit. I don't have the materials. Well, if you're not the right person to commit in these meetings, then you're not the last planner. We need to get somebody in here that can. I am the last planner, but I don't have the materials. I can't commit. How many times have we seen that? And it's because they've implemented last planner, as you and I know, without having a first planner system. The first planners were supposed to have an overall master schedule and a strategic plan and an aligned supply chain. And if we don't have that, I think it's the height of disrespect to the last planners in construction to not have an effective first planner system. So that, back to your point, we have to have enough detail in pre-construction at a high enough level to where we can then do a pull plan, but enough detail, to your point, where we can align the supply chains. Because it doesn't matter, and I'm passionate about this, but Holly, I know you know all this stuff, so this is for the sake of the podcast. Yeah. But it doesn't matter if it's now, before COVID, or 100 years ago. I've done the research. Every job for the last 150 years has had to order things like timber or elevators or exterior curtain wall or tile from Italy well before the project started. It doesn't matter. It's never COVID-19. We had that problem before COVID-19. And if we don't queue up those supply chains, we're in trouble. I really cringe when last planner consultants run around saying, don't do predictive planning. Only do your 6-week look, your pull plan 6-week look ahead, and your weekly work plan. I hate that, because all you're doing is setting up last planners to fail. And so, do we want to get down into the detail of the last planners in pre-con? No. Do we need to have enough understanding of the phase? Absolutely yes. Do we need to understand the zones? Yes. So now topic 2, I just recently found out in doing some research, and this is pretty well documented. Like, we talk about Japan, lean, the Toyota production system, but they learned that stuff from us, most of it. And we knew these things in World War II, and we had to ramp up our industrial production machine. And then the war ended, and we forgot our own lessons, right? And Japan took those. They were humble, and the United States wanted them to be an economic power as a democracy, as a buffer to China. And so they took, we essentially trained them and funded them. And because they have an island culture with total participation, they implemented all these systems. And some of the things that they learned was centered around this concept of one piece, one process flow, and also respect for people. But in the United States, we forgot that. And so in the United States, we continued with these beliefs from Frederick Taylor that talked about rushing and pushing and panicking workers, creating piece workers, segregating trades, treating people like they're assets and not human beings. And so we went down one road, Japan went down another, but we actually taught them. And so most superintendents in construction have been taught, you want to go faster, push the people, yell, scream, and panic, bring out more people, work overtime, bring out all the materials to the site, and threaten. That's what everybody's taught. And those are all the wrong things. And so when we attempt to convince a trade partner that says, I want the whole building, give me the whole building, or a super that's like, no, I want massive zones, which happens all the time, we literally, to your point, I like to pull up 2 different things. One is I'll pull up the calculator and show them how the phase stretches in and out based on how you zone it. The other thing is I just type into YouTube and I say batching versus one piece flow. And there's a couple really neat videos, and they look at the video and they're like, what? They're not, they were just taught wrong, but they're smart people. And I always joke with them, I'm like, before you came to this earth, before this existence, you were told to batch. When you were born, the doctor slapped you on the backside and said batch. When you went to elementary school, high school, college, they said batch. Your first job, they said batch. Your partner, when you got married, said batch. And then all of a sudden we realized batching in large batch sizes is the worst thing you can do. Doing smaller portions, this is called Little's Law. Holly, you know this. Little's Law says The smaller the batch size, the faster you go. The more level the work, the faster you go. And if you finish as you go, the faster you'll go. That is a science. That is a production law. That is fact. We will never get past that. That's as solid as gravity. And nobody's taught that. So as soon as they see it in that video or that demonstration, then they're like, oh my gosh, you're right. If I do a 10,000 square foot zone and finish, the trade partner behind me gets to come in sooner, and we are QCing and finishing and punching as we go, and we're learning as we go. And one of these days when we have blockchain and we can pay, we'll pay as we go, and we start to understand that zoning a project in the right detail is the key to speed. And here's the one last thing I want to say, is that consultants go around the world and say, oh, this is how you pull plan. And they pull plan a whole floor or a whole phase. And they're like, let's sequence this. The master schedule is just like large, massive activities. What they've done is they've batched with large batches. And I know for a fact, because we've analyzed, like probably at this point, thousands of schedules. They are wasting at minimum, what I see on average, 3 weeks to 3 months of absolutely no reason for it, just wasted time. Just wrong zone sizes without the right level of detail. And there's no reason for it, because in case the listeners in the podcast are like, well, wait a minute, how does that work? Well, if you send a trade partner into a massive area and they've, caution taped the whole area and they're like, stay out, I want the whole floor. Their duration, you will wait for everything that they have to be done until another trade can move in. But if they split that up into segments and they're like, I'm going to release the first 10,000, the second 10,000, then other trades start sooner and the whole project comes together faster. Trades and supers need to understand that it does not matter how fast your fastest trades can go. It matters how fast your slowest trades can go. Trades need to realize that they only do well as everybody does well. So it doesn't matter if you, A-player electrician, can go do a great job. If the drywall contractor is going way slow and in your way, you're going to be stuck on that project paying for everything anyway. Yeah. So you'd better help these other trades and get everybody going as much as we can, the same speed, the same distance apart, flowing through the project.
It is a good rundown.